The first search aircraft arrived at Atik's last reported position, 0800 hours, March 27th, U.S. Army Air Force bomber, from 1st Bomber Command. The pilot flew grid patterns for 4 hours. He found nothing. No wreckage. No survivors. No oil slick. The storm had scattered everything across miles of ocean. Visibility was poor. Whitecaps made spotting debris nearly impossible. USS Noah, a Clemson-class destroyer, commissioned 1918. Steamed to the site under Lieutenant Commander Harold Groford's command. Noah was among few destroyers available on the eastern seaboard. Most had been assigned North Atlantic convoy escort duty. Noah searched 12 hours, methodically covering the area where Atik had transmitted distress signals. The crew spotted small debris pieces, life jackets, wooden planks, cork floats, nothing definitively identifiable as originating from USS Atik. The ship had simply disintegrated. USS Sagamore, a fleet tug designated a T-20, attempted reaching the area, but was forced back by heavy seas. The Atlantic was notoriously dangerous in late March. Storm systems moved through regularly. Wind speeds exceeded 40 knots. Waves ran 15 to 20 feet. Small vessels like tugs couldn't operate safely under those conditions. March 30th, 3 days after the sinking patrol aircraft discovered 5 empty lifeboats, drifting approximately 80 miles south of the attack site. The boats had been blown off course by the gale. They were empty. No bodies, no supplies, no indication of what had happened to the men who launched them. The lifeboats were marked with USS Atik's identification numbers. That was the only physical evidence ever recovered. The 141 men were simply gone, swallowed by the Atlantic. What nobody in the U.S. Navy realized at the time, the Germans knew exactly what had happened. April 9, 1942, Radio Berlin broadcast a message. The High Command announced today that a Q-boat of 3,000 tons was sunk by a torpedo after a battle fought partly on the surface with artillery and partly beneath the water with bombs and torpedoes. The Germans knew about Project LQ. They knew the Americans were using Q. They knew USS Atik was not a merchant vessel. German intelligence had been tracking the program. U-boat commanders received warnings to watch for armed merchant ships operating independently. The element of surprise was gone. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, was furious. Project LQ had been his response to Roosevelt's suggestion to use Q. The program had consumed $500,000. 5 ships converted, months of training, complete operational security, and it had produced 0 U-boat kills. Worse, USS Atik had been sunk on her first patrol with all hands. The Germans had broadcast the kill worldwide. The program was exposed. King ordered an immediate review. The review was brutal. Q ships were too slow to chase U-boats, too lightly armed to fight surface engagements, too vulnerable to torpedoes. The crews had inadequate training. The doctrine was flawed. German U-boat commanders were too experienced to fall for the trap. Supporting forces were too distant to help when Q ships encountered trouble. The entire program was a waste of resources. King ordered all Q ship patrols suspended. USS Asterion was recalled from patrol April 1942. USS Bighorn completed 1 more patrol in May and was reassigned to cargo duty. USS Eagle was decommissioned. USS Captor was sent to the Pacific, where she served as a patrol vessel but never engaged an enemy submarine. The only Q ship that saw real action was USS Anacapa in the Pacific, and she almost sank 2 American submarines by accident when they entered her patrol area without proper identification. By August 1942, Project LQ was over. Then the Germans started noticing something strange. May 1942, boat losses began increasing. 3 submarines sunk in American waters. June 5 more went down. July 7 submarines destroyed. The kills weren't from Q ships. They were from destroyer escorts, patrol aircraft, and improved convoy tactics. The United States Navy had learned. Convoys were organized. Air coverage was extended. New radar systems were deployed. Depth charges were improved. Destroyer escorts were built specifically for anti-submarine warfare. The tactics that worked were not Q ships. They were coordinated air and sea patrols with proper equipment and training. By September 1942, German submarine operations off the American coast became too dangerous. U-boat commanders were ordered to focus on mid-Atlantic convoy routes, where American defenses were weaker. Operation Drumbeat was over. The second happy time had ended. Between January and August 1942, the entire German U-boat campaign, in Operation Drumbeat, sank 397 Allied ships in American waters. Over 2 million tons of shipping Approximately 5,000 merchant sailors killed. Cargo worth hundreds of millions of dollars lost. Reinhard Hardegen himself was credited with sinking 22 ships totaling 114,000 tons across his entire career, but the rate of sinking was dropping. American shipyards were building Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them. The convoy system was working. Air patrols were effective. Radar was finding submarines before they could attack. Kapitänleutnant Reinhard Hardegen returned to Loyang May 2, 1942. He had completed 2 patrols during Operation Drumbeat. He sank 19 ships totaling 90,000 tons across both patrols combined. He received the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, Germany's highest military decoration. Adolf Hitler personally awarded him the medal at his headquarters in East Prussia. Photographs from that meeting show Hardegen pale and thin after weeks at sea, at attention while Hitler pinned the oak leaves to his uniform. But Hardegen was done with combat patrols. The physical and psychological strain of submarine warfare had taken its toll. July 31, 1942. He relinquished U-123 command. He was assigned to training duty, first with the 27th U-boat training flotilla in Gotenhofen, then as chief of U-boat training at the torpedo school at Marineschuma. Later in the war, he worked in the torpedo weapons department, overseeing testing and development of new acoustic and wire-guided torpedoes. In the final months of the war, he served as a battalion commander in Marine Infantry Regiment 6, fighting against British forces around Bremen. Most officers in that unit were killed. Hardegen survived only because he was hospitalized with a severe case of diphtheria in the last days before German surrender. After Germany's surrender, May 8, 1945, British troops arrested Hardegen. He spent 18 months as a prisoner of war before being released late 1946. He returned to Bremen and started an oil trading business. The business was successful. Hardegen became wealthy. He served on Bremen's city council 32 years, from 1952 to 1984, representing the Christian Democratic Union Party. He was active in veterans affairs and maintained contact with other former U-boat commanders. In interviews later in life, Hardegen was careful about how he discussed the war. He said he was not a Nazi. He did his duty for his country, not for Hitler. He stated that by 1942, he and his crew had realized Hitler was a madman driving Germany toward catastrophe. When asked about the merchant sailors he had killed, Hardegen maintained that he had tried to help survivors when possible. He claimed he provided food and navigation directions to lifeboats. He ordered neutral ships to pick up survivors. He believed in fighting honorably, even in submarine warfare. Historical records partially support these claims. Survivors from several ships Hardegen sank reported that the U-boat surfaced, and the commander directed them toward nearest land or shipping lanes. In at least one documented case, Hardegen forcibly stopped a neutral ship and ordered it to rescue survivors from a tanker he had just sunk, but other survivors reported no such assistance. The reality was complex. Submarine commanders had to balance humanitarian impulses against their own survival. Stopping to help survivors exposed the submarine to counterattack. Spending time on the surface in hostile waters was extremely dangerous. Most commanders, including Hardegen, helped when they could do so safely. When they couldn't, they left survivors to their fate. Hardegen never mentioned USS Atik specifically in his memoirs or interviews. The engagement lasted only a few hours. To him, it was just another merchant ship, just another target. He didn't realize Atik was a Q-ship until German radio broadcast the news. April 9th. Even then, it didn't register as particularly significant. He had survived. His U-boat had survived. He sank the enemy vessel. Mission accomplished. Move on to the next target. The fact that 141 American sailors died in that encounter apparently didn't trouble him. They were the enemy. They were trying to kill him. He succeeded. They failed. That was war. Hardegen lived to be 105 years old. He died June 9, 2018, in Bremen, Germany. He was the last surviving U-boat ace from Operation Drumbeat. German newspapers published lengthy obituaries. They called him a naval hero. They praised his courage and skill. They noted his post-war civilian service. Most obituaries briefly mentioned that he had sunk 22 ships during the war. A few mentioned USS Atik specifically as the only American cruise ship sunk in World War II. None mentioned the 141 men who died when Atik exploded. For administrative purposes, Rear Admiral Russell Wilson wrote in a memorandum, July 2, 1942, the ship should be considered lost on March 27, 1942. He added that aside from notifications already made to dependents, No further publicity would be given to the loss of this ship. USS Atik was classified. The mission was secret. The loss was not announced publicly. The families of crew members received telegrams. Missing in action. Lost at sea. No details provided. No explanation given. Official death notifications were not sent to families until April 5, 1940, for more than 2 years after the sinking. The Navy did not officially acknowledge that USS Atik existed until after the war ended. When German records were translated, they revealed the full story. U-123 had engaged and sunk an American coup ship. March 27, 1942. The submarine had been lowered into a surface engagement. The coup ship had opened fire and almost destroyed the U-boat, but the submarine escaped and came back to finish the job. 141 Americans died. 1 German died. The battle lasted approximately 3 hours. The official U.S. Navy history of Project LQ was written after the war, based on records maintained in secret files by the Chief of Naval Operations during the conflict. The assessment was honest. The coup ship program was a failure. The concept was flawed. The execution was poor. The results were non-existent. 0 U-boats sunk. 1 coup ship lost with all hands. Millions of dollars wasted. The analysis recommended that coup ship tactics should never be used again. Modern submarines were too fast and too well armed. Surface ships couldn't compete. The only effective anti-submarine weapons were aircraft, destroyers with sonar and depth charges, and convoy escorts. Coup ships belonged to World War I. They had no place in modern naval warfare. The fundamental problem was that coup ships required submarines to surface and close to gun range. That tactic had worked in World War I, when submarines had limited battery capacity and spent most of their time on the surface. But by World War II, submarines had better diesel engines, larger batteries, and could remain submerged for extended periods. More importantly, German submarine commanders had studied British coup ship tactics from the previous war. They knew the signs to look for. A ship sailing alone in dangerous waters. No escorts. Suspiciously good condition for a supposedly civilian vessel. Crew that seemed too disciplined. Unusual handling characteristics. German standing orders, by 1942, explicitly warned commanders to be cautious of potential coup ships. When in doubt, attack from maximum range with torpedoes. Don't surface. Don't close to gun range. Don't give the enemy a chance to surprise you. Hardegen had violated those standing orders when he engaged Atik. He surfaced. He closed to 700 yards. He planned to use his deck gun, and he nearly paid for that decision with his life and his boat. The fact that Atik damaged U-123 and killed 1 crewman proved the coup ship concept could work at least in theory. But 1 damaged submarine was not worth the loss of 141 trained sailors and an entire ship. The mathematics were brutal. Project LQ consumed resources that could have been used more effectively elsewhere. The 5 ships required crews totaling over 500 men. Those sailors could have manned destroyer escorts or patrol craft. The 5 ships required fuel, ammunition, supplies, maintenance, and port facilities. All of those resources were desperately needed for other purposes in early 1942. The $500,000 spent on Project LQ could have funded other anti-submarine programs, improved depth charges, better sonar equipment, additional patrol aircraft, training for escort crews. Any of those investments would have produced better results than coup ships. Lieutenant Commander Harry Linwood Hicks was never found. His body was not recovered. None of the crew were recovered. The explosion that destroyed USS Atik left nothing behind. No remains, no personal effects. Just wreckage scattered across miles of ocean. The Navy listed Hicks and his entire crew as killed in action. March 27, 1942. They are commemorated on the tablets of the missing at various military cemeteries. Their names are carved in stone, but they have no graves. They rest somewhere on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, 300 miles east of Norfolk, Virginia. The exact location of the wreck is unknown. The wreck of USS Atik has never been found. The ocean is deep where she went down. The currents are strong. Wreckage from World War II ships is scattered all along the Atlantic coast. Fishing boats sometimes bring up pieces of metal, but identifying the source is almost impossible. USS Atik could be anywhere in a 100-square-mile area. She could be in one piece, or scattered in fragments. The pulpwood cargo might have disintegrated decades ago. The guns might be buried in sand. The hull might be covered in marine growth. Nobody knows. Nobody is looking. There are too many wrecks, too much ocean, too few resources. USS Atik is just one more casualty of a war that happened 80 years ago. That is how failure happens in war, not through incompetence or cowardice, but through desperation and poor judgment. When leaders are under pressure to act, they sometimes choose the wrong solutions. When options are limited, they sometimes pick the least bad choice instead of waiting for better options. When resources are scarce, they sometimes waste them on programs that cannot succeed. Project LQ was not created by bad people. It was created by desperate people trying to save lives and stop an enemy that was winning. But desperation is not strategy. Pressure is not wisdom. Quick action is not always the right action. USS Atik and 140 American sailors died because someone decided that cruise ships were the answer to the U-boat threat. They were not. The real answer was convoys, air patrols, radar, sonar, destroyer escorts, and time. Those solutions took longer to implement. They were less dramatic. They didn't make headlines, but they worked. By the end of 1943, the U-boat threat was contained. By mid-1944, German submarines were being hunted and destroyed faster than Germany could build them. The Battle of the Atlantic was won. But USS Atik and her crew never saw that victory. They died in March 1942, 3 months into America's war, sailing a ship that never should have gone to sea, fighting an enemy with tactics that never should have been used. What worked against the U-boats was not clever deception or traps. What worked was systematic application of technology, tactics, and resources. Convoy escort became standard by mid-1942. Every merchant ship crossing the Atlantic sailed in organized groups, protected by destroyers, destroyer escorts, and corvettes. The escorts were equipped with sonar, depth charges, and increasingly effective radar. They worked in coordinated teams, sharing information, covering each other's blind spots. When a U-boat attacked a convoy, it faced immediate counterattack from multiple ships. Air coverage extended farther and farther into the Atlantic as new long-range patrol aircraft entered service. The consolidated B-2 for Liberator bomber, modified for maritime patrol, could fly nearly 2,000 miles from base. These aircraft were equipped with radar that could detect surfaced submarines from miles away. They carried depth charges and could attack U-boats before the submarines even knew they were there. So-called Atlantic Gap, the area beyond the range of land-based aircraft, shrank month by month. As new air bases were established in Greenland, Iceland, and the Azores, by late 1943, there was no gap. Every convoy had air cover throughout its entire passage. Carriers, small aircraft carriers built on merchant ship hulls, air cover even in the middle of the Atlantic. These carriers were exactly what Project LQ should have been. They looked like merchant ships. They sailed with convoys. But instead of trying to trick U-boats into surface gun battles, they provided aircraft that could hunt submarines from above. The escort carriers worked. They sank U-boats. They protected convoys. They were worth every dollar invested in them. Technology improved rapidly. Sonar became more accurate. Depth charges became more powerful. Hedgehog and Squid anti-submarine mortar could fire patterns of charges ahead of the attacking ship, increasing the chances of a hit. Radar improved to the point where it could detect periscopes, and even submarines' direction-finding equipment could locate U-boats by their radio transmissions. Code breaking became more sophisticated. By mid-1943, Allied intelligence was reading German naval communications regularly. Convoy routes were adjusted to avoid known U-boat concentrations. Task forces were dispatched to hunt U-boats, whose positions had been revealed by decrypted messages. Training improved dramatically. New destroyer escort crews spent months in specialized schools, learning anti-submarine tactics. They practiced attack runs. They studied U-boat behavior. They learned to work as teams. By 1944, American and British escort crews were highly skilled professionals who knew their business inside and out. Industrial production overwhelmed the German submarine force. American shipyards built Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them. In 1942, the United States launched over 5 million tons of merchant shipping. In 1943, over 19 million tons. By 1944, the production rate exceeded anything the U-boats could possibly destroy. Even at the peak of their effectiveness in 1942, U-boats sank less than 8 million tons per year. The numbers were unsustainable for Germany. Perhaps most importantly, the Allies never gave up. When tactics failed, they tried new tactics. When technology proved inadequate, they developed better technology. When training was insufficient, they improved training. When resources were lacking, they built more resources. The war in the Atlantic was won through relentless, systematic improvement. Project LQ represented the opposite approach. It was a desperate gamble on an unproven concept. It relied on outdated tactics from World War I. It wasted resources that could have been used more effectively. It sent men to sea in ships that were not ready for combat. And when it failed, the program was quietly abandoned. Without learning the right lessons. The right lesson was not that cruise ships couldn't work. The right lesson was that gimmicks don't win wars. Steady application of proven methods wins wars. Technology, training, resources, and determination win wars. USS Atik proved that lesson at the cost of 141 lives. These stories matter because they remind us that war is not just about the victories we celebrate. War is also about the failures we learn from, the mistakes we acknowledge, the lives lost in pursuit of solutions that didn't work. USS Atik represents a painful truth. Sometimes courage is not enough. Sometimes determination is not enough. Sometimes even the best intentions lead to tragedy. The 141 men who sailed on USS Atik were brave. They knew the mission was dangerous. They went anyway. They deserved better than to die on a ship that wasn't ready, executing a plan that couldn't succeed, in a program that was cancelled 3 months after they were killed. Their names are carved on memorial walls. But their story was classified for decades. Most Americans have never heard of USS Atik. Most historians don't mention Project LQ. The program was an embarrassment, a failure, something the Navy wanted to forget. But forgetting failures means we risk repeating them. Remembering USS Atik means remembering that wars are won, not by desperate gambles, but by careful planning, proper equipment, realistic tactics, and the willingness to admit when something isn't working. The United States won the Battle of the Atlantic because the Navy eventually abandoned failed programs like Project LQ, focused on solutions that actually worked. That lesson cost 141 lives. We should not forget them. The clock read 16:45 hours when Lieutenant Commander Harry Linwood Hicks stepped aboard his new command at Portsmouth Navy Yard, Maine. The date, March 5, 1942. The vessel awaiting him had absolutely no right being anywhere near a battlefield. Hicks carried impressive credentials: South Carolina native, Naval Academy class of 28, seasoned veteran of destroyer and cruiser operations. He understood artillery. He understood naval combat strategy. What stood before him, however, defied every principle of modern warfare. USS Atik hull designation, OK-101. 3 decades of rust and deterioration wrapped around a creaking steam engine. She looked precisely like what her papers claimed: tired merchant vessel limping through her final years of service. But appearances concealed deadly secrets. Hidden behind collapsible bulkheads sat for naval cannons. Camouflaged within fabricated deckhouses waited 8 machine guns. Disguised as ordinary cargo equipment lurked 6 depth charge launchers. Below decks, pulpwood packed every available space insurance against torpedo damage, designed to keep the vessel afloat even after catastrophic hits. Her documentation identified her as SS Vilfranca, Portuguese registry, civilian merchantman. The truth painted a radically different picture. She was America's most dangerous gambler ship, a floating ambush engineered to lure German submarines into fatal encounters. The concept emerged from sheer desperation. January 19, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt suggested to Admiral Ernest King that perhaps cruise ships offered solutions to the escalating U-boat nightmare. King, harboring significant reservations, interpreted this presidential suggestion as essentially a directive. Within days, 5 civilian vessels underwent clandestine conversion at Portsmouth. No announcements, no standard documentation. Emergency funds totaling $500,000 bypassed normal requisition channels. Every written record disappeared into classified files accessible only to the Chief of Naval Operations. The program existed because German submarines were obliterating American merchant vessels faster than shipyards could replace them. January 12, 1942, British intelligence detected massive U-boat concentrations along North America's eastern seaboard. Stretching from New York to Cape Race, they transmitted warnings immediately. That identical day, Kapitänleutnant Reinhard Hardegen, commanding U-123, launched a torpedo into the British steamer Cyclops, 350 miles southeast of Cape Sable, Nova Scotia. 98 souls perished. Operation Drumbeat had commenced. Throughout the following 6 weeks, German submarines hunted with impunity within sight of American shores. Tankers erupted into towering infernos as tourists watched from beaches. Freighters slipped beneath waves visible from lighthouse windows. Oil slicks and debris littered vacation coastlines. U-boat commanders dubbed it the second happy time. American coastal municipalities refused blackout protocols. fearing tourism industry damage. Navigation beacons remained illuminated. Merchant ships sailed independently, fully lit, following predictable schedules. For experienced submarine captains, conditions resembled target practice at a firing range. Between January and March 1942, U-boats destroyed 137 Allied vessels in American waters. 650,000 tons of shipping vanished. 3 million gallons of fuel oil, critical supplies, weaponry, ammunition, food all consigned to the ocean floor. American destroyers and patrol aircraft remained committed to North Atlantic convoy protection. The eastern seaboard possessed virtually zero defensive capability. Somebody needed to respond. Portsmouth. Navy Yard workers invested 3 weeks converting Atik and her sister vessel Asterion. They carved gun ports into deck plating. They installed hydraulic panel systems capable of dropping away within seconds, revealing concealed weaponry. They reinforced structural bulkheads to absorb French naval artillery recoil. They constructed ammunition hoists, connecting magazines to gun positions. They disguised everything as standard cargo handling equipment. 3 weeks. Rush assignment. The Bureau of Ships demanded both vessels operational. By March 1, 1942, they achieved the deadline. Combat readiness remained questionable. Atik was a 30-year-old civilian steamer constructed in 1912. Single propeller. Steam propulsion. Maximum speed, 9 knots. Zero armor protection. Weapons concealed but relatively light caliber. Crew training consisted of 3 weeks. Most had never experienced combat. The operational plan appeared straightforward in theory. Atik would navigate independently through known U-boat hunting zones. She would present as irresistible Bateslow merchant vessel. No escort, no visible defenses. When a U-boat detected her, the submarine would surface to conserve torpedo inventory and sink her using deck guns. Standard German doctrine. Torpedoes cost significant resources. Slow cargo vessels didn't justify their expenditure. German commanders surfaced routinely, close to short range, employed deck artillery to finish defenseless targets. That moment when German submarines surfaced Atik would deploy her panels, expose her artillery, and unleash devastation. Supporting destroyers were theoretically positioned nearby to complete the kill once the U sustained damage. That was the theory. Reality proved substantially different. The first cruise ship casualty was a fishing trawler designated Eagle. She departed on patrol February 1942. Under Lieutenant Commander Leonard Roscoe, the Navy had acquired the Boston beam trawler MS Wave, briefly designating her auxiliary minesweeper USS Eagle, AM-132, before reclassifying her USS Captor, PYC-44 cruise ship operations. Eagle was the smallest conversion, displacing merely 300 tons. Her diminutive size supposedly offered advantages. German submarines might consider her too insignificant for torpedo expenditure, preferring surface engagement with gunfire. Eagle discovered nothing. She patrolled New England coastal shipping lanes throughout February. 0 U-boat contacts. No targets. Returning to port with mechanical failures. The Navy dispatched her again in March. Identical results: no contact, no U. Chronic mechanical problems plagued the aging vessel. By April, the Navy abandoned Eagle's cruise ship role, reassigning her to standard patrol duties for the war's duration. The second attempt involved USS Asterion, Atik's twin. Commander George Walter Le Guin assumed command. Asterion matched Atik in virtually every specification built. 1912. Identical armament. Identical disguised weapon systems. Identical pulpwood cargo. She commissioned February 27, 1942, 1 week preceding Atik. Asterion and Atik departed Portsmouth together. March 23 on what officially constituted shakedown cruises, but rapidly transformed into active combat patrols. Orders directed the vessels to position themselves approximately 480 miles apart after 5 days at sea to maximize coastal shipping lane coverage while maintaining some mutual support capacity. Reality: 480 miles represented excessive distance for effective mutual support. If either vessel encountered trouble, the other couldn't possibly arrive in time to assist. March 26th, night Asterion cruised approximately 240 miles south of Atik's position. At approximately 20:45 hours Eastern Wartime, Asterion's radio operator detected faint distress transmissions, SOS ship torpedoed. The signals were fragmentary, intermittent, difficult to interpret. Lieutenant Commander Le Guin immediately altered course toward the transmission source. Position remained uncertain. Signals had been weak and sporadic. Asterion steamed northward through darkness, searching. First light, March 27th. Lookouts scanned horizons. They observed nothing. No vessels, no wreckage, no survivors, no empty ocean. Asterion continued, searching throughout the day, covering grid patterns around estimated distress call positions. At 1400 hours, they discovered debris, small wooden fragments, cork floats, an empty life jacket, oil slicks, wreckage scattered across several square miles. No method existed to identify source vessels. Could have been any among dozens recently sunk. Asterion searched until darkness, found nothing else. Leguan faced a decision: continue searching or resume assigned patrol. He chose patrol resumption. Asterion was supposed to hunt U-boats, not conduct search and rescue operations. Other vessels could handle that mission. Leguan took Asterion back to her assigned area, continuing the Q-ship mission for additional days. She encountered no U-boats, no targets. March 31st, Asterion received recall orders. The Navy was beginning to recognize Project LQ's failure. Back in Portsmouth, Leguan filed his patrol report, mentioning the distress call and wreckage. Intelligence officers compared his report with other information. They concluded the distress call probably originated from USS Atik. Asterion had been the closest vessel to Atik during the attack, but Asterion had been too distant to help. By the time she reached the area, Atik had been gone 12 hours. The wreckage Asterion discovered might have been from Atik or from another vessel sunk that week. No method existed to determine certainty. The third vessel in Project LQ was USS Bighorn, a tanker converted to resemble a civilian oiler. She sailed April 1942 under Navy Captain Command. Bighorn spent 6 weeks at sea, 0 U-boat contacts. She returned to Port May with nothing to report. The program was failing not because Q-ships were ineffective, but because U-boats had learned caution. German submarine commanders had fought British Q-ships during World War I. They understood the tactic. They knew some merchant vessels carried concealed armament. By March 1942, German intelligence had warned all U-boat commanders to maintain vigilance regarding suspicious cargo vessels sailing independently through convoy routes. Lieutenant Commander Harry Linwood Hicks understood the odds. He had been briefed comprehensively on the program. He knew British Q-ships in World War I achieved mixed success at best. He knew Project LQ was experimental. He knew 4 previous Q-ship patrols had produced 0 U-boat kills. He knew Atik was slow, marginally armed, and vulnerable. But Hicks believed in the mission. Born in Kentucky, raised in a small town, Hicks joined the Navy in 1926. He advanced through enlisted ranks before attending officer candidate school. He served on destroyers and cruisers. He understood gunnery. He understood tactics. He had trained his crew 3 weeks on operating concealed weapons, how to drop panels, how to aim under combat conditions, how to remain hidden until the final possible moment. USS Atik's crew consisted of 141 men, officers, petty officers, gunners, engine room personnel, deckhands. Most were in their 20s, some teenagers, a few in their 30s. They came from everywhere across America: farm communities, industrial cities, coastal towns. Some had served years in the Navy. Others enlisted after Pearl Harbor. They all knew they were sailing into danger. Morning of March 23, 1942. Atik cast off from Portsmouth Navy Yard at 1300 hours. Weather clear, cold, north wind. Atik appeared exactly like an aging cargo steamer. Rust streaking the hull. Faded paint. No visible weaponry. No naval markings. She flew no flag. Just another merchant ship heading to sea. Shipyard workers watched from docks as Atik disappeared beyond the harbor breakwater. All anyone could do was wait. The engagement occurred March 26, 1942. Night. Atik cruised alone 300 miles east of Norfolk, Virginia. Seas moderate, overcast sky, limited visibility. At 1700 hours. A lookout on U-1 to 3 spotted smoke on the horizon. Reinhard Hardegen was conducting his second patrol off the American coast. He had already sunk 9 vessels on this mission. His crew was experienced. They had hunted 3 weeks. They understood what to seek. Kapitänleutnant Reinhard Hardegen was 29 years old in 1942. Born March 18, 1913, he had originally trained as naval aviator before injuries from a crash transitioned him to U-boat service November 1939. He assumed U-123 command May 19 for 1. By March 1942, conducting his second American waters patrol, he had already established himself among Germany's most effective submarine commanders. December 23, 1941, U-123 had departed Lorient, France, as part of Operation Drumbeat. Admiral Carl Dunitz, commanding the U-boat fleet, had selected only 5 Type 9 long-range submarines for the first wave attacking the American coast. U-123, U-130, U-66, U-125, and U-109. These boats possessed range to cross the Atlantic, operate weeks off the American seaboard, and return to France. Most German U-boats couldn't make that journey. Type X boats were larger, carried more fuel capacity, and could transport more torpedoes than standard Type 7 submarines operating in the North Atlantic. Hardegen's mission: penetrate close to New York Harbor and sink maximum shipping. January 12, 1942, he sank the British freighter Cyclops off Nova Scotia, inaugurating Operation Drumbeat ahead of schedule. Throughout the following 3 weeks, he moved south along the American coast, sinking vessel after vessel, tankers, freighters, cargo ships. Most sailed independently, fully illuminated. Following predictable routes, American coastal cities refused blackout implementation. Navigation lights remained operational. For U-boat commanders, conditions were almost too favorable. Hardegen later wrote in his patrol log that American unpreparedness was unbelievable. The entire coastline blazed like a carnival. Ships were silhouetted against coastal city glow. His first patrol, Hardegen, sank 9 ships totaling 53,000 tons. He returned to Lorient February 9, 1942, and received the Knight's Cross. After refitting and resupply, U-123 departed March 24 for a second patrol. Hardegen's orders remained unchanged: hunt American shipping, sink everything possible, conserve torpedoes when feasible using deck guns on smaller defenseless targets, return when ammunition or fuel ran low. When U-123's lookout spotted the vessel evening of March 26, Hardegen studied the target through binoculars. Old cargo steamer, single funnel, slow speed, no escort, no visible defensive armament. Precisely the kind of ship not worth wasting a torpedo. Hardegen decided to shadow the target until conditions were optimal, then surface and attack. Standard procedure: save torpedoes for more valuable targets. U-123 followed Atik for hours, remaining submerged, remaining invisible, watching, waiting. At 1937 hours, Hardegen gave the order. U-123 surfaced. The submarine maneuvered into firing position. Range 700 yards. Hardegen fired 1 G7E torpedo. The torpedo struck Atik's portside beneath the bridge. The explosion was massive. Fire erupted from cargo holds. The ship listed slightly to port. Men appeared running on deck. A lifeboat lowered on the starboard side. It appeared like a normal merchant ship, sustaining a torpedo hit. Crew abandoning ship. No weapons, no defense. Just another victim. Hardegen maneuvered U-123 around Atik's stern to finish the job. That was when Hicks gave the order. The hydraulic panels dropped. The 4-inch guns swung into position. 8 machine guns opened fire. The first 4-inch shell landed short of U-123, sending up a massive splash. The second shell missed in deflection. The third missed high. Machine gun fire raked the submarine's conning tower. 1 round struck von Rixersee Rudi Holzer, a midshipman standing watch on the bridge. He collapsed with a chest wound. Hardegen reacted instantly. Full throttle. Emergency dive procedures. U-123's diesel engines poured black smoke as the submarine accelerated away from Atik. The gunners kept firing, but the target was moving fast and presenting a narrow profile. The shells missed. U-123 submerged before Atik could land a killing shot. Hardegen had been incredibly fortunate. He had come within seconds of destruction. His submarine had taken machine gun fire. One of his crew was dying, but the boat was intact. He could still fight. U-123 circled underwater and approached Atik from a different angle. At 2129 hours, Hardegen fired a second torpedo. This one struck Atik's engine room. The explosion destroyed the boilers. Steam and smoke poured from the hull. The single propeller stopped turning. Atik was dead in the water. Bow settling. Stern rising. The crew was abandoning ship in earnest now. Lifeboats in the water. Men jumping overboard. Hardegen surfaced at 03:07 hours to observe Atik sinking. The ship was still afloat, stubborn, refusing to go down. The pulpwood cargo was maintaining buoyancy despite torpedo damage. At 2250 hours, something inside ATIC detonated. The ship exploded. A massive blast illuminated the night sky. Debris flew hundreds of feet into the air. When the flames cleared, USS Atik was gone. Nothing remained except wreckage and oil. 141 men dead. The entire crew. No survivors. The lifeboats had been in the water, but a severe gale blew in immediately after the explosion. The storms killed anyone who survived the blast. Hardegen buried Vonrich zur See Rudi Holzer at sea 10 minutes later. 1 German casualty. 141 American casualties. U-123 left the area and continued hunting.